Okay, everybody. Welcome to another Sunday broadcast from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. My name's Mick Napier, and I'm very happy this week to welcome Kholoud al Ajarma from Ida camp in Bethlehem. Before that, her family, well, she'll tell you all about it. Kholoud spoke recently in Scotland, and we hope to have her back again in the future in the flesh. But this is her today coming from Bethlehem, live to you. Any questions you have, just send them, and she'll do her best to answer. So, Kholoud, welcome.
Thank you, Mick. Hello.
Welcome. I heard you talk in Scotland a few weeks ago. I was most impressed. So were other people in the room. But first of all, tell people about yourself.
First, thank you very much for having me. I'm very proud to be able to speak to you, and I know the great work that the Scotland Palestine Solidarity Campaign is doing. My name is Kholoud al Ajarma. I was born and raised up in Ida refugee camp near Bethlehem, and I am in Ida today. So if you hear background noise, that's part of living in a refugee camp. Ida is home to around 5,000 people who live in an area that is less than 1,000 meters squared.
People can see a picture there from Ida camp behind me. I went there quite a few times in the past. Tell us about life in the camp, Kholoud. You grew up there, I think. Were you born when your family were in Ida camp? And tell us what life is like there, because it's not something that most people in Scotland can easily understand.
Yeah, sometimes when people hear the word camp, they automatically think of tents, which is not the case today. The camp started in the early 1950s as tents, but people later built small blocks that became later their houses. The camp itself is about 80 meters by 100 meters. It houses, as I said, around 5,000 people. They come from 27 different villages. Each family has a small bit of land originally where they established no space to expand, so people build their houses on top of each other. The camp itself is also surrounded by the Israeli apartheid wall from two sides, which take to the other side all the land that was once accessible to the people of the camp. Also, there are 5 watchtowers with that, which means that also there is military invasions that are very frequent. There is a military base just on the hill, on top of the hill near Ida camp. So the army often comes in the camp to practice, and also there are night raids. That said, however, people in the camp are still very perseverant, and they live every day with so much hope. There is 2 schools in the camp, for example, run by the United Nations Refugee Works Agency. The teachers themselves are locals, so the kids go to the school in the camp. However, after the age of 15, they go to the governmental schools outside of the camp. What else do you want to know about Ida?
Can you tell people what they can see behind my head here?
Oh yeah, that's the entrance of the camp. So the camp itself, if you're coming from Jerusalem or Bethlehem, it's based between the two. Of course, it's very difficult to go to Jerusalem, but we're placed between Bethlehem, Beit Jala, and Jerusalem. And behind you, that's the picture of the entrance of the camp. To your left in the picture, there is the UN sign where the United Nations office is. And behind you is the key of return. And the key is a symbol for Palestinian refugees, because when they lived in the years of the Nakba, 1947 to 1949, many people only took the key of their house, hoping that they'll return soon. And later, the key became part of the plight of Palestinian refugees and a symbol of the right of return to their houses. So what is behind you is a key that was created by the camp residents a few years ago. and it became part of the everyday life in the camp. And there's a big a written piece on it that says not for sale, because the right of return is something that is very sacred for Palestinian refugees. At the very end of the picture, you can also see one of the watchtowers of the Israeli apartheid wall that is also leaning towards the camp.
Kholoud, I can walk from Ida camp to the checkpoint, and I have to go through this checkpoint, which reminds me of nothing more than the sort of place where cattle would be put through massive amounts of steel. I can get through there. It's horrible. So I can kind of walk through there in about 5 or 10 minutes. But for you, it's not the same. For residents of the camp, it isn't the same, is it? How difficult is it for you to walk that short distance in order to access Jerusalem?
Well, to be honest, I would say I saw you in Scotland last month, and it is literally easier to get to Scotland from Bethlehem than to go to Jerusalem, which is about 7 miles away. It is that hard because with the wall and with the checkpoints, we are not allowed to Jerusalem unless we have a permit. So it's very difficult to go. Even people, there is, for example, one family from the camp that lives on the land that was owned by the church, which is now on the other side of the wall. And this family, the kids used to come with us to school. So they would run from their house to the camp. It would take about 2 minutes in the morning. Today, if they want to come to the camp, they have to go around the root of the wall through the checkpoint, which takes about an hour and a half. And they're, let's say, privileged to be able to cross through the checkpoint, whilst most people cannot. So it's very difficult to go through the checkpoint unless a person has a permit from the Israeli authorities. Some Palestinians who work in Jerusalem, for example, have to leave at 3 a.m. to be able to cross the checkpoint because it will be very crowded in the morning. And as you said, it is inhuman because there are many iron gates that people have to go through in order to go to the other side. There are cameras, security checks, security clearance, and so on, just only to be able to go to the other side of the checkpoint. Once you're on the other side of the checkpoint, it's easier. You get a bus to Jerusalem.
I have to say, Kholoud, I kind of stopped going to Palestine for many reasons. One was because we have a lot to do here, but the other one was that while going through that horrible checkpoint, and you pass in front of a couple of young soldiers who are behind very, very thick plate glass, and they bark at you, they shout. There's no human interaction at all. It's like a nightmare. I stopped going because I got really angry and started shouting at these people and lost my temper, which is not a good idea, but it's so disgusting. Let's turn to something nice. Can you tell us about this picture? Who are these people? Somebody thought that was you on the left, but it's not you. But who are the other people in the photograph? Yeah.
No, these are my cousins, and the one in the middle is my grandma Fatima. She lives with them, so they also live in the camp, but they live up in the camp. My grandma is almost 100 years old. She was displaced from the village of Ajjur in 1948, and together with her 4 children who were very young at the time, and she ended up in Ida. So now she still lives in Ida, waiting and hoping for the right of return.
Tell us about what you've heard as a young person. I was born the year before your family were expelled from Ajjur in 48. But you've heard about it from people who were there. What have they told you about how they were forced from their homes and their village and their farms and the place that they loved and the place that they considered home? What have they told you, Kholoud?
I think there's a lot of trauma that people carried from the time of 1948 until today, and that trauma was passed from one generation to the next, the same as the perseverance and the resistance and the struggle that people carried along. So before 1948, my family, my grandma and her children and her husband lived in Ajjur. They owned land. It was a life that people would describe as a self-sufficient life. So they produced what they ate, they had trade with the neighboring villages, they had their own animals, they had their own land, they farmed the land, then they lived off the land. In 1948, when the village was attacked, my grandma had to leave with her children. So she had 4 children. She carried, she had a big scarf where she put 2 on her back. She held the other 2 in her hand, and they walked out of the village.
You say the village was attacked. You say the village was attacked. Who attacked it?
There was one of the Jewish militias at the time attacked the village, and they entered the village from the western side. Of course, by then there were many villages where massacres were committed. So people also heard about these massacres and people being killed and children being taken out.
So which month was this? Which month did this happen?
Ajjur was attacked in June. So 48, yes. So by then there were other villages that were attacked earlier. And when Ajjur itself was attacked, the men stayed, and well, when the militia came into Ajjur, they went into the mosque, which was the highest building in the village, and they climbed the minaret and they started random shooting at the people from there. The men stayed and fought back, but they were farmers, so they had some old weapons that were left by the British, but these were just for, you know, for general protection. They never knew that they would have to fight for literally for their lives and the lives of their families and their protection of their land. So, so the women took the children and started running away out of the village to the nearest place where they would find safety. And my mom was a very young girl at the time, so she said that she didn't even get time to wear shoes. So she ran with them, and the men stayed and fought, but then they had only a few bullets, I guess. So after that, a few of the men were killed, and the others had to leave as well to follow the women that ran away. They ended up in, like they slipped in the mountains, and they carried on until they, 2 days later, they reached the city of Beit Sahor near Bethlehem.
So this was in June 48. Presumably the family, your people, knew about the extermination of the people of Deir Yassin and various other massacres. The Zionist claim, we know how many lies they tell, but the Zionist claim, of course, is that Palestinians were asked to stay there by the Zionists, but they were urged to leave by Arab governments who broadcast over the radio. Get out and allow us to come in and kill all the Jews, and then you can come back. Would you like to comment on this nonsense, this disgusting story that has been given a lot of coverage by people who should know better?
Well, to be honest, there are a lot of stories and propaganda that is very harmful to the Palestinian narrative, and that is one of them. There are many others that I heard over the years, and it is very difficult to say that was the case because, well, first, at least in the case of Ajjur, very few people had access to what is now known as media. So the radio, if somebody had a radio, it would be the mayor of the village or something like that. So people themselves had no access to such media, but they did hear from the people who were running away from other villages. So they heard firsthand narratives of people who were coming and saying, our village was attacked, the women were killed, some women were raped. So they were very frightened that this would happen to them to start with. And the other thing is that Ajjur was literally attacked by the militias, so they had no choice but to leave. And the third thing is that it is true that some of the Arab armies entered Palestine to fight and help the Palestinians at the time, but these armies were, at least the narrative of my family is that they never told the people leave, because the idea was that they would come to help people remain in their places. And what made people leave was, again, the massacres that were committed, the militias that came with so much power that people were not used to it, and the attacks that were committed against villagers in so many places.
Of course, it's a preposterous series of lies that they tell, but I just wanted to ask you about it. Your family lived the experience and they passed that on to you. So your family are the owners of land in the village of Ajjur. You and I had the privilege of speaking to Salman Abu Sitta and various other Palestinians who have proven, who've recorded, who've done meticulous research, gone through all the records to show that you own the land in Ajjur. But who controls that land now, Kholoud?
Well, the land now is known as the British Park or Britannia Park because it was funded by the Jewish National Fund, JNF-UK, and which funded the establishment of a recreational place for people to go and enjoy the nature, let's say, in the place. The JNF took the land straight after 1948, and they planted trees to hide the ruins of people's houses. So what happened after 1948 is that in many places, bulldozers were brought to destroy the houses of the people so that they would literally prevent them from the possibility of return to their houses. And in many places, like in Ajjur, some of the remains still stand today. And if you look closely and if you're interested, you'll see the ruins of people's houses. But the idea is that bulldozers were brought, they destroyed some of the original houses, and the JNF came as an institution that was with an image of working towards land reserving and establishing green parks and so on, and planted trees on these ruins in order to hide them. These are trees that are not indigenous to the environment. They suck water and they are not part of the original vegetation, but they grow fast and they make a lot of greenery that would hide what was there once. So the JNF today calls it the British Park, and it's a recreational activities park where people can go and hike and so on.
Can you explain that monstrous sign behind me there?
Yeah, so the sign behind you simply says the British Park, and it says that it was a gift from generous donations from the people of Great Britain to Israel.
So Balfour gave Palestine to Jewish Zionist colonists in 1917. He didn't consult your family in Ajjur beforehand, but the JNF-UK has acted in the same spirit by giving this piece of Palestine, which they think they have the right to give to Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the JNF itself is a colonial organization, so it was established in 1901 with the aim of going to Palestine, trying to purchase lands of the original inhabitants and change them to Jewish property. That, however, didn't work. At the time, very, very few people did sell lands. These were not Palestinians, often were businessmen who owned some land in Palestine. But even with that, it was very minimal, the amount of land that was actually purchased by the JNF. After 1948, almost straight away, the newly established state of Israel made it possible for the JNF to own land in Palestine. So the first purchase, I think, was about 2 million dunams of land that was transformed into the ownership of the JNF. That meant that the JNF became a guardian of these lands, and of course, it's a land that would not be it would be prohibited for non-Jews, and that also meant that the original people have no claim of these lands according to the Israeli law at the time. or what they established as law, let's say. So the JNF from the very beginning is a colonial organization, and that's what it carried on to do, and it still does today in Palestine. And the British Park or Ajjur is only one example of what they're doing in historic Palestine, including like the ethnic that happened in 1948.
So this mafia, these gangs who drove your family from your homes, the whole village, and 700,000 other Palestinians from their homes, they then declare a state. They pass laws. I actually was taken on a tour of Jerusalem many years ago and looked at the house, a very big Palestinian home. And my guide told me that the judge in the Israeli Supreme Court who lived in that house helped to pass a law that said this house could not go back to the Palestinian owners. So it was that kind of banditry. But your family were pushed. Your family were forced out. They were afraid. They were terrorized, and they left an area that was controlled by the Zionist militias. So I think the Israelis called them, when they passed their law of theft, they called them absentees. Yeah, that you were absent on a given day, and therefore they could simply take your home, your village, and so on. Can you explain that a bit further for viewers, Khoulud?
Yes, well, what happens is that Israel passes all the time laws that makes it easier to control Palestinian lands, and that still happens today. So the law of the land of absentee mainly says that if there is a piece of land anywhere in the country that has no owners, or the owners are not there, that means that the state has the right to put its hand on the land and declare it as state land and use it as it sees fit. That also is the case for many of the lands that Israel facilitated controlling after 1948. It is still the case today. So in many areas, for example, I was working in an area near Bethlehem in Area C, where people are now find it very difficult to work in their lands because Israel is prohibiting the establishment of roads that lead to these lands. This means that after 3 or 5 years of that land not being used, the state can also put its hand on it under the excuse that this is abandoned land, and that means that the land becomes part of the property of the state. So it's a very colonial process, but it's like let's say a legalized colonialism in a sense.
I mean, in the surface, it seems like a good law that was handed down from the Ottomans, that if land is not worked, somebody should take it, somebody else should benefit from the land. But in this case, the Israelis erect a barrier or different types of barriers to prevent Palestinians getting to their farms, and then they say the farm is abandoned and the state can seize it. Yeah,
exactly. It's not land that is abandoned because people are not working in it or they don't want to work in it. They're abandoned or forced to be abandoned because people cannot even reach them and work in them. So that's why the state facilitates the acquisition of those lands. Even though the people themselves, at least in the case of Ajjur and many other villages after 1948, people tried to sneak back and tried to work in the land, but those who were found were killed or arrested right away. So it's still very difficult to even manage to do that. So it is forced, and it's taken by force at the end of the day.
I don't want to talk about disgusting things, but when the Palestinians did try to come back to their land after 48, they were murdered by Zionist border guards who often pushed an orange into their mouths to say, you came back for your oranges, well, here you are. You must be familiar, Khoulud, with the concept of present absentees, yeah? I mean, in apartheid South Africa, they had a bizarre concept. The black people were called natives. So, I mean, in the English language, a native is the person who lives in a place. I'm a native of Glasgow. But in apartheid South Africa, they developed the concept of foreign natives, which is a ridiculous idea in English. But I believe in Israeli apartheid, they developed a concept of present absentees. Now, I used to be a school teacher, and I used to mark people, well, a teacher, a student was either present or absent. They often tried to say they were present when they were absent, but we knew the difference. But in Israeli apartheid, a large number of Israeli citizens who were Palestinians, unlike you who were pushed, who had to leave areas of Israeli control, they were trapped inside the area of Israeli control, but they still stole their land, and they called them, I believe, present absentees. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, well, it is a concept that Israel used in order to expel more Palestinians and control more land. So at the time, they used that in order to say that these people have no right to claim their lands. So they were pushed out of their lands. Some of these people remained in what became later Israel. But that meant that by definition they would have some rights in the state. But to be for the Israelis, it would be it would be not beneficiary for the state and for the racist laws and the racist formation of the state, let's say, to give these people equal rights. So that was one of the reasons, or one of the ways, in order to like disregard these people and disregard their rights, so that they can't claim return to where they came from.
Yeah, I visited a very beautiful place in the north of Israel, which was seized by Zionists in '48, and it's now a kind of artists' colony. The mosque is now a bar. It's a very pleasant place. The Palestinians from that village live 2 kilometers away, and they can see their own homes. They can even visit the village, but their property has been stolen and they've been forced out. Yes. Can I ask you, how do you feel about Ajjur? How does your grandmother feel about Ajjur? How do the people in the camp feel about the places they were violently expelled from, Kholoud?
Well, the simple answer is that if you come to the camp and if you ask any child on the street, where do you live, their answer will be Aida camp. But if you ask them, where do you come from, they would say the name of the village where they come from originally, even though these kids were brought up and born in Aida refugee camp. And that's because the older generations and the Nakba generation and the generations that came after believe that it's important to give that narrative to the younger generations and to claim that sacred relationship that people have with the villages where they originally come from. So as long as I remember, I was always taught that yes, we live in Aida camp, but we're not from here, and our village is somewhere else, and our village is called Ajjur. It is still there. We have the right to return to the village, and so on. My grandma was always a very important step in that linkage between us and Ajjur. And even though I haven't been to Ajjur I've been now once, but as a child, I've never been to Ajjur, but my connection with the village was very strong because of the narrative of my grandmother, who not a single day passes without making a reference to Ajjur. So every day she would speak about how the village was. She would tell stories from the time when she lived in the village, the neighbors, the people who lived there. And every point of reference for her is the village. So she would, for example, when we would eat, she would always make a connection of, oh, this bread is not as good as the bread which we baked in the village, because at the time they produced their own wheat, and they had their own bread that was made like A to Z from scratch from the land. The figs are never as good. The cactus fruit is never as sweet. The people are the best, we're the best in the village, and so on. So there's always that reference, but also the actual connection that people have because of the ongoing displacement that happened, and the feelings of the people that shared so much in common. So like my grandma, even though she's almost 100 years old, she would know everybody in the camp because they experienced the same things. She would know like the village that every person came from, and she would have a lot of knowledge about these villages, even though they're not her own village. So it's not only that people have that linkage with their own original village, but they have that linkage with everybody's original village, because there is that collective narrative and collective identity that is related to the villages. And I was involved many years ago now with the Lajee Center, which is one of the organizations in the camp, where we took a group of children to the villages where they come from to see what the villages look like today. And we took them to 10 villages. And I was privileged to go on one of the trips. Unfortunately, Ajjur wasn't one of the villages on that trip, but we went to 5 other villages, including Beit Jibril, which is like a neighboring village to Ajjur. And although I haven't been in that specific trip to my village, I felt the connection to every single village we visited, because the narrative of the grandparents of the children we took was very similar to that of my grandmother. So it's not only about where we come from, but about also the collective narrative. And for me, as a person who lives in Aida refugee camp, and I have now been to Ajjur and I saw the village, it is very devastating to see. Of course, I always believed that in the right of return, not only for us to Ajjur, but for all Palestinian refugees and their descendants. But when I actually saw the village and saw that how empty it is, and my family still has the land deeds to the village, while we live in a small house in a crowded refugee camp, the land we owned is at least 10 times the size of the whole camp, where 5,000 people live today. So the injustice of it, the idea that we could have been planting our own fruits and vegetables, having our own land, and for my grandma to live her last days on her land rather than in a small room in a refugee camp. It's just the sense of injustice that I feel every time I think about it is very great. But also, since the village is still there, since people are still hoping for the right of return and working for it, there is still hope that it will become a reality one day.
So what about the Zionist hope? I think it was Ben Gurion who said it, the old will die and the young will forget.
Yes, that was said at some point, but also many other things were said about how the Zionists want to ensure that Palestinians never return. And that I think the next generation, although I feel very sad that that my grandma's generation is now passing away, and that we are losing many people who actually witnessed the Nakba and what happened in 1948. And my grandma is seeing a lot of her friends passing away, which is scaring her, but also mostly scaring her that she knows that she's getting older without being able to return to her land. It is very, very scary, but at the same time, all the generations that come after the Nakba generation hold the hope. They all pass the hope that their return, the right of return, is still very sacred to every one of those. And the grandmothers and the grandfathers are passing the house keys that symbolize return to the younger generation. They're teaching them about the importance of the right of return and what was there before 1948. And I think as long as we continue to teach our children our history, it is almost will never be the case that the young will forget. And I don't believe the young will ever forget, because it's our right. And the young generations of Palestinians are very determined about their rights, and they know their rights very well.
So let's discuss how we can fight together to right this wrong. I've been to the British Park several times. I've walked over your village. It's empty. It's a park. It's a nice park, but it's empty. There's nothing to prevent the families going back there, except racism. I mean, Israel is probably, I don't want to say anything very good about the state of Israel, but one thing they are very good at on a racist basis is bringing in large numbers of people from around the world and making them, giving them a life. They have a ministry of absorption, but it's simply racism that means Palestinians can never, of course, benefit from that. So how can, it's racism, but the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, which controls your property, operates in Scotland, operates in England, Belgium, Brazil, and so on, 50 countries almost, I believe. How can we get together to fight, one, for restitution without prejudice to the right of return, but to force a recognition of the right of return? Just before you answer that, the official position of the British government is that the Palestinian right of return is still valid. Now, they don't want to talk about it. They arm the snipers who kill people who want the right of return, but that's still the official position of the British government. How can we get together, Kholoud, with Palestinians like yourself to fight for the recognition of that right of return?
Well, first of all, the right of return is a right that is known as like a right for every Palestinian refugee, and it is the refusal to allow Palestinian refugees to return is we first need to make sure to fight the Israeli claims that include, for example, that, oh, there is no physical space if we allow Palestinians to return, there's the state security and so on, because these are false claims. The only reason why Israel is not allowing the right of return is a racist reason, and its desire to maintain a demographic Jewish majority. So if Israel claims to be a democracy for all its citizens, that means that Palestinians also have the right to return and to bring their families back to Israel. That aside, the Palestinian refugees and the right of return is part of international law. So since it was passed, like the United Nations Resolution 194, which was passed later in 1948, states that Palestinians who wish to return have the right to do so. So it is in human rights law, it is in the humanitarian law, and it is in refugee law. So in internationally, if we're talking about laws and human rights laws, the right of return is a right that is not only legal, but also possible. Now, historically speaking, that means that not only it's a right that was passed in 1948. However, Israel is denying it. So when we're talking about it as a possibility, then we have to give the Palestinians the right to decide individually if they want to return. And if they do want to return, then states and government bodies and the United Nations and so on should force Israel to abide to international law. This, unfortunately, is not happening because Israel has some sort of immunity internationally, and it's backed by the greatest powers. However, our cause is a just cause, and I think that with pressure from people and governments, the right of return can be possible. And I think solidarity groups are doing very good work to raise awareness about what is happening in Palestine now. And I think the greater awareness that there is about the right of return and about things like the role of the JNF in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the more that we have hope for the implementation of the right of return and other rights of Palestinians. So I think the road might be long, but step by step, I think we can reach somewhere where there is more awareness about the role of the JNF in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And that would be a step towards holding them accountable for what they're doing in Palestine and the colonization process that they're involved in.
The graphic here came from a JNF pamphlet, actually, from I think 15 years ago, which said the JNF tractor follows in the wake of the IDF tank, meaning that the tank would carry out the initial wave of violent ethnic cleansing, and then the JNF would follow behind it to consolidate. But you know, we are strong here and they're weak. Can you talk briefly about, before we come on to positive proposals, Kholoud, about your recent experience with the JNF and your appeal? We put forward an initial claim, an initial approach to the Charities Commission, 2012 or 2013, I can't remember, asking for the JNF to be declared not a real charity because of what it does, but we didn't succeed. And you've been involved in another approach to the Charities Commission. Can you tell viewers what happened and the verdict and the reasoning of the people who found against you?
Yeah, well, last year I wrote a letter with help of a group of solidarity campaigners in the UK to the Charity Commission, because the JNF, or 3 different organizations that are affiliated with the JNF, are part or recognized and registered as charities in the UK. So we wrote to the Charity Commission asking them to deregister the JNF as a charity. First, because at least in my understanding of charity, they don't adhere to the ethical principles that a charity should. So my argument was that the JNF is involved in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, including my village. And I gave examples of how it transformed the land of my family and that of the people of Ajjur into the British Park. And the JNF itself declares that it is with the help of the donations of its friends, as it calls them, in the UK, that the park has been established. So it's not only that the JNF is part of the ethnic cleansing, it claims that the people who support it in the UK are part of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian villages. And with my letter, I also supported it with the land deeds that my family has for our land in Ajjur. And the signatories were not only me, there was people from my family, people from the village of Ajjur, from other refugee camps in the West Bank, from Jordan, from the USA, and so on, who all, when I told them about that the JNF is recognized as a charity in the UK, were appalled, and they all supported the letter that I wrote to the Charity Commission. What happened then is that the Charity Commission replied back saying that a similar claim was made in 2013, I believe, and nothing has changed since. So back in 2013, the claim now it will be denied as well. And that was very, very appalling to me. First, because, well, saying nothing has changed in Palestine since 2013 is very unjust, because every day there are invasions in Palestine, every day there are attacks on Gaza, every day there are more confiscations of lands in Area C and everywhere. So that was unfortunate to read. And the other thing is that they said that I have no standing, and legally that means that I have no right to ask them to do that, because I'm not directly affected, or my rights are not affected by the doing of the JNF, which both of them I think are not true. But that was the claim of the Charity Commission.
Kholoud, if you have no standing and your property is now under the control of the JNF, if you have no standing, who could possibly have standing? Who? What would you need to be to qualify for standing? It seems preposterous. Yeah,
basically it's a loop in the law that they can use. There is no, I believe I do have a standing, and if I don't, no one will. But I think it is a loop in the law that they can use in order to say that I'm not directly affected at the minute by the doings of the JNF. So that was what they used. And so what we did is that we took it for appeal in the court, and we had a session in April in Manchester, where we had a court hearing, and it was in the case was number 11 in 2018. So it is very rare that cases against the Charity Commission make it to court anyway. But that was very hopeful for us, because I thought that that meant that we might get somewhere. With me, there were also two British citizens who also made appeal, because they also wanted, as taxpayers and as people who are also affected by the fact that the JNF is a charity, they also wanted to appeal against the JNF. So what happened is that after the court session, which took place in Manchester, we about 2 or 3 weeks later, we got a reply that the case was dismissed, mainly because the judge agreed with the Charity Commission. And what the Charity Commission used is a piece of law as well, that is what they said is that for them as a Charity Commission, what matters is that the goals of the organization that is registered are adherent to their regulations. So what the JNF says about itself is that it's a good charity, and it does a lot of green work and establish parks and so on. So these claims are good enough for the Charity Commission for it to remain as a charity. However, they did say, the lawyer at the court did say that he recognizes that my right might have been affected by the doings of the JNF. And he did say that if the court supports my claim for a standing, that means that the British government and the Charity Commission will get involved in issues of what he called political controversy. So that also means that there might have been a fear of what it might mean politically for the British government if they support my claim.
To acknowledge the reality, yeah, that you are violated and your family have been violated by the JNF, by the Zionist entity, including the JNF. Kholoud, let's move to what we can do then. I want to show you one thing, if I may, and the viewers this image, which I think is very, very significant. This is one of my favorite images. And if I get my head out of the way again, you'll see Israel is at the bottom here. Every year, the BBC does an opinion poll around the world, and they ask people their opinions, their view, their anger, or positive or negative views about different countries. Israel's always very, very, very near the bottom. Sometimes it is the bottom. So Israel's very unpopular in every European country. Popular opinion is hostile. I think we can we can continue with a campaign, strengthen a campaign with you in Scotland, in England, a political legal campaign. I think we can win the battle for public opinion without any difficulty. I think we can. And there's a chance, I'd put it no higher, that we could win a case in a civil court for damages for yourself and your family without a prejudice to your right of return. I think we would like to do that. It would be good if some of the viewers think about this. Palestine's a small country far away, a scene of great suffering and pain, not just your grandmother feeling very sad, but a lot of agony. But the roots of that crime come from Britain, not just Balfour, who was Scottish, but from the JNF operating here. So I would appeal to people watching this. Don't think about Palestine as an abstraction. Think of Kholoud al Ajarma and her family, and let us fight together as people for justice, because the crime is committed in Palestine, but it's also committed in Scotland. It's committed here. So I know, Kholoud, you're studying for a PhD in Holland. So you come to Europe from time to time.
I do, yeah.
So we might have the pleasure of your company here in Scotland again, yeah?
I hope so. I do agree with you. I think the public opinion is very important here, but also the JNF, as long as it continues as a charity, and as long as it continues to collect funds and support the Israeli army and support the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the suffering of Palestinians will continue. So that's why we need to put an end to the claims of the JNF and its portrayal of an image as a guardian of nature into the real image that it is helping in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It's a colonial organization, and it is continuing every day to support the Israeli army, and it is doing all kinds of unethical things against Palestinians in Palestine.
So, Kholoud, they're killing Palestinians in large numbers in the West Bank, but even more so, of course, in Gaza. And Britain sells sniper rifle parts to the Israeli army. But we can do something. We might not be able to stop the arms trade as quickly, but we can take on the JNF. Would you like to make some concluding remarks, Kholoud, to viewers? What you would like them to do, and how we can make a difference in partnership with yourself? Yeah.
First, I hope that the right of return will be allowed for Palestinians before my grandma passes away. And I really, really hope that she would be able to see Ajjur for her last days. She did say that if she does not make it, and if she passes away, she asked us to take her remains and bury them in the land of Ajjur when we do return. So I hope that people everywhere would continue to support the Palestinian right of return, to believe that it is not only legal but possible, and to support Palestinians' rights in general, but also the right of return in particular. I hope that people can also spread the word about what is happening in Palestine. The JNF portrays itself as a charity and as an organization that helps nature and establishes parks and so on. But in reality, it's a colonial organization. And the more people are aware of that, the closer we are to justice, I believe. I think that justice is on our side. It might take time, but step by step, we will reach our rights, and Palestinians hopefully will be able to return to their lands. I hope that people can support us in these steps, and also in spreading the word. I think it is more about it media-wise, and also using social media, for example. And I personally won't stop the fight, neither will my grandma, and not millions of Palestinian refugees all around the world. So I hope you would carry on and stand with us in our fight as well.
Kholoud al Ajarma, it's a pleasure to have had you on the show. It's an honor. We are very well aware that the whole bloody crime was hatched in London by the government that gave us Balfour. We're very well aware that our government continues to arm Israel and has increased its arms sales to Israel tenfold since the massacre of 2014. And because Theresa May and whoever follows her will be in solidarity with Netanyahu, then we have a duty to be in solidarity with you and your family and your comrades in Palestine. So look, guys, gals, that's what you've heard. We have to rise to the occasion. Kholoud's asked for our support, and I think we have to give it. So please don't just like this program at the end, but please get in touch, like it, like the Facebook page. But that's not enough. If you want to roll up your sleeves and help the JNF campaign, stop the JNF campaign, then please get in touch. It's easy if you want to do so. So I'll just say once again to Kholoud al Ajarma, thank you very much, Kholoud. Thanks for coming to Scotland and the UK a few months ago, and we look forward to fighting together against a common enemy. So thanks again, Kholoud al Ajarma.
Thank you for having me, Mick.
Okay, guys. Right, everybody, that was the today's show. Next week, we have Jeff Halper, the author of a wonderful book called War Against the People, which analyzes Israel's niche in the international arms bazaar by virtue of testing the weapons on the people like the people behind me, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Jeff shows how this has become a threat, not just to the Palestinians, but to a lot of people around the world whose governments are shifting to repression along the model of Israel. So thanks for listening. Please like the page, get in touch, because we are going to organise across Scotland and the UK in order to confront the JNF, in order to fight them, in order to build on past significant successes. We shall win. And Kholoud has showed us the human face of the victims of the Jewish National Fund. Thanks very much for watching. See you next week.